And then in 2014, I had to get brain surgery. I had a tumor removed. At the time, I was a consultant, right? And so as a consultant, I was the product, and my product was not available because I was in a hospital for about 6 months, right? So the company totally just went away. I nothing, I had to rebuild everything. Not only so after the surgery, I had to relearn how to walk and talk, and I had to rebuild my career, which is kind of crazy thinking back. But so how I got this is going to answer how I got into podcasting, right? So so I was actually in a wheelchair for about somewhere around 4 months or so, right? And a wheelchair, walker, cane, kind of mixture. My daughter at the time was 3 months old, right? And she was learning how to walk for the first time. And I was 37 years old, and I was not very happy because I'm like, I was walking my whole life, and now I can't put my right foot in front of my left foot. So I saw my daughter; she would get up, fall over, 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 and never complained once, right? Well, she didn't know how to complain, but she didn't complain once, right? And I'm
Yeah.
thinking to myself, I'm like, and after a few months, by the way, she learned how to walk, and I was still in a wheelchair. I'm like, my attitude really sucks, and I need to change that, right? I need to get her attitude, which is you fall over, you just get back up. You fall
Yeah.
over, you just get back up, right? And so I did. And then after about a month or so, I started to be able to walk again. I was walking with a cane, but I was starting to walk. I was able to get out of the wheelchair and able to start to walk, right?
Wow.
Now, at the time, I couldn't speak well either because from the surgery, I had stomach issues, which my tongue was so numb, and I was slurring like crazy. I sounded drunk all the time. I just had that really, but
Oh yeah.
I had a really bad slur, right? So I couldn't talk. So I had to do these mouth exercises, right? And
Oh,
I had to do it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And I didn't want to do it. My attitude was starting to stink. It was like, I don't want to do this. This is ridiculous. So I needed to force myself to be able to actually do it. And so I built a show because if I had a guest coming in tomorrow, I had to do my exercises. I had to practice. I had no choice, or else that person would not be able to understand what I'm saying. And so I built a show originally to do that, right? And
yeah.
just to do therapy. But then, and this is how I actually got into the fintech podcast, right? So back then I was just interviewing anybody, right? Like anybody would say yes because
Yeah.
you had to go to my website to listen to the podcast. It wasn't like you went to Spotify. There was no Spotify. There was no Apple Podcast. It was you had to go to www dot whatever bankonapodcast.com to listen to the show. So I had one guest that came in, and it was by I don't know how I got her. She was a founder of a large fintech company, which was recently acquired by American Express, called Cabbage. If anybody's
Oh yeah.
familiar with them, and
Mhm.
so I interviewed her, and she was talking about the story of what they're doing. I'm like, oh my god, she's doing everything that I was consulting banks to do, a few years back, and they're actually doing it. And I'm like, this is actually quite fascinating. So I started talking to more fintech founders, getting their story, and then a company contacted me and said, "Hey, can we build you a studio in downtown New York City on Broad Street?" I'm like, "Sure, why not?" So I built I had a studio built for me. Went down there, and then I started to learn about Flash Boys, like flash trading. And the place I was in was right next to the stock exchange. I'm like, and I'm starting to read all these books, and people are telling me stories. Oh, by the way, I used to work right over there. All these founders or investors, I used to work right over there, and we used to print
Awesome.
corporate bonds. I'm like, my God, there's such a deep story in finance here. And that's how I got into fintech because I'm like, these stories are so darn interesting. And
So,
so I'm hearing all these stories. I'm like, this is freaking fascinating to me. And that's how I got into it. And so I started interviewing fintech founders and VCs, and I was just very, very interested in the story. So
that's
next thing
fast.
is how did I build the production company, right? So
Yeah.
the
Exactly.
pandemic started, right? And so I'm doing most of my interviews, 99.9% of my interviews, 100% of my interviews were done in a studio pre-pandemic, right?
Right.
Downtown New York City, people would come in from all around the world, or they would come in from wherever, all around the United States. The pandemic hit. Nobody wanted to go to a studio in New York City. Nobody
Right.
wanted to go, not even people from New York City wanted to go to a studio in New York City, right? They didn't want to
Right.
be inside. And so I had to actually figure out remote recording, remote production, but still make it sound like it was in a studio. And that was a challenge. So one week straight, I literally figured out, I tested out dozens of microphones. I tested out dozens of software. I just I had to figure it out. And then I did. And so then I started to do remote recordings, and I would ship microphones out to guests, and they would use a microphone that I shipped out to them. They get to keep the microphone and whatnot. And then we would do the recording, and then they would hear it, and they're like, my God, that sounds so good. I was
Right.
on like 3 podcasts last month, and I can't even listen to myself for 2.5 minutes, right? But here I sound like I'm in a studio. Can you help us build our own show? I'm like, sure. Yeah, so my first, like, I think the first month of the pandemic, I got like 10 clients,
Nice.
and they contacted me. I didn't ask them. I didn't have a production company. I'm like, sure, I can help you with your production, no problem. And so I did, and that's how it
That's
started.
so great. So your clients helped you build your business. That's a really great story. And your story's so inspiring, man. That's really cool.